So far, I've put about 24,000 miles on the van in a little less than a year. And while this works pretty good for going to the trail that's just down the road, it's definitely a no go for going down the highway. So I figured a good place to start was just to measure all the bicycles that I have. Yes, we have too many bicycles. And figure out which one of those is the biggest bicycle. And I won't get into what all those measurements mean, but the Giant is the winner. Alex has been enjoying his new ride very much. And while bikes with fenders are great for doing this kind of thing, they're not so well suited for the van, I don't think, as bicycle fenders can be a real headache to deal with. And I could probably make them work with some kind of an adapter bracket, but I think I'll leave that out for right now. So I took the Giant and tried to find kind of the ideal location of where to put the bikes, keeping clear of the door jamb and leaving enough space to the back of the seat there, and using this point as a reference mark to take all my measurements from. Ideally, I want to line up with some existing vertical bolt holes to be able to tie into later, but it worked out that I wasn't able to do that. I had to shift off of that mark about an inch, I think an inch and a half maybe, so that the track location was lined up with the underside of the van, which will make sense shortly, and just removing the spare tire. So after figuring for a while, I figured out that this seam right here is the same seam that's right here, and trying to read through all those spot welds and ribs and all of that, I had to shift off, and you can see there's an offset there, and so I had to take that into account. And so it was a little bit complicated to get this first track in, but I got it to fit inside of this rib so you can't see any of the nutserts. I need to make some shims that will fit between the ribs on the floor of the van and allow the track to be fully supported all the way across the length of the van. And the 1/2 inch plywood I'm using here, I just went a few thousandths higher than the rib height so that whenever it's tightened down, there's some compression on the wood. And I thought about making this out of aluminum, but decided that that was overkill as I won't be tying down any lathes in the back of the van. This is the track I'm using. It's called L-Track, and I need to add a few additional holes here and there. And so you can see the trick that I did to make sure it remains centered in the hole. That's a 3/4 hole, but it's a little bit oversized, so I just add a little bit of tape, and then there's a hole drilled in that piece of aluminum, and just punch mark the center of it. So L-Track comes in a whole bunch of different flavors, and mine is flanged on both sides and has pre-drilled countersunk holes approximately every 5 inches. Now I'm using 1/4 20s. I'm sure you could use M6 as well. And after I checked the hole that I drilled, I was flush, but the 1/4 20 was not flushing out in the existing holes. So I had to run down real quick with the countersink and I had set the depth stop from the one that I did and just cut the rest of them so that they would be flush. This is the piece of cut-off L-track that I'm not using, and just demonstrating the different fasteners that I've got here. I got some studs, and you can see that it's hitting the head. It won't allow it to go all the way over into the position. And the other fastener I got there usually comes with like a pear-shaped loop or a ring on it. And these were super cheap. They were like 80% off or something, so that's what I went with. I got these Sunlight mounts on Amazon. They're really affordable, and they're already the proper bolt hole spacing for L-track. I just had to drill the holes from 1/4 inch out to 3/8 to fit the studs that I've got. And those are a little bit jiggly unless they're tied down. But they do fit an S-hook type ratchet strap. Here I've already got all my shims pre-drilled and in place, and I just need to punch mark the hole location for the nutserts. Now I will say that I only intend to tie down maximum maybe 300 or 400 pounds, and this should be more than sufficient. But if you were going to do this and tie down a lot of weight, then you would need to put aluminum shims and through bolt and use a piece of material on the underside possibly to sandwich the track to the body better and get, you know, more load rating out of it. And as far as I know, it's rated for 1,000 pounds with a breakaway of 4,000 pounds. And how is that determined? By the mounting, I could find no standard whatsoever. So my point is, in my application, this should work just fine. And it makes it really easy because the threads are in the floor, so if I want to pull this up, it only takes a few minutes. And I may add more fasteners later down the road as I start to grow vertically and do other things inside the back of the van. And previously I had pulled up the entire floor and put down this insulation layer. It may or may not be effective for that, but what it does do is it makes it really soft to walk on the floor. It went from being like really hard to walk on to very cushy. So it was a little bit of an obstacle as far as installing the track, but not a big deal. I just went about an inch beyond where the track ended at and left myself enough room to be able to come back and tape that down with some foil tape. Just getting all the screws loosely started so that I can get the floor to fit under the flange of the track, and then I can tighten it all down. And yes, I'm putting all the screws in by hand and not breaking out the impact. If you've ever spun a nutsert or a riv nut before, you'd know why I'm not doing that. So the second track went really quick as there was no obstacles in my way on the underside of the van, and I just removed the spare tire was about it, just so I didn't punch a hole in it with the drill. But other than that, it was really straightforward and fast. I didn't have to figure anything out, and it didn't land inside of a rib. It's just out in the open. So if you look underneath, you can see the rib nuts and the screws. But no big deal. They are under the van. So I do have a lever action type rib nut installation tool. It's like a large pop rivet gun, but it doesn't work nearly as good as this tool that I modified in a previous video. This one might take a little more time, but the threads are always in the center of the hole that I just spent a whole bunch of time trying to figure out the layout on and get exactly straight. Whereas the lever action, it's difficult to pull, but the second is that sometimes it pulls off center, so now your threads are not in the center anymore, which is no good. So this might take a little longer, but it's definitely right every time. I don't step on this part of the floor very often, but I did notice because there's no support rib right there that the floor lays over some. So I just used some of my leftover shim stock to add some support to that area of the floor. And this piece was a little tight initially, which was a good thing. It's better to be a little bit tight than to be too loose right off the bat. So I did have to take it back to the table saw and just trim a small amount off of that, and then it fit very nicely. So you can see I've got some bikes tied down to the van, and of course the one bike there is with fenders, and so I can't tie it down like I would without some kind of an adapter like I said previously. And here I've got the Giant set up in there, and I've just got some Velcro strappy-doos going through the wheel there to hold the back down. And that's 3 bikes, so I can get that even more compact by having an offset plate on the mount. I can shift it forward on the center bike, and then I can push the bikes even closer together and even turn them around the other way. It's just a matter of configuring it. I've got it pretty good for what it is right now, and that's pretty much what I'm using today. I've been using it for about a month, and so one thing I did notice was that in the future, when I put a bed platform in, the seat is sticking up way too high. I don't have a dropper seat post on my bike, and so I had to get one and install it on my bike. The only problem is well, one, I didn't have a special tool for knocking out the bottom bracket, so I had to make that on the lathe. That was really quick and easy. But the real problem was 2 days after I installed this, the thing started creaking like nobody's business. And trust me, I went through every single thing, and what I determined was the inside of this dropper post was what was causing the creaking noise. It wasn't the seat, it wasn't the clamp, it wasn't the contact between the post and the seat tube. It wasn't anything but the part itself. And so I returned it and put my regular seat post back on, and of course the creaking noise went away. So any of you mountain bikers that are watching, you have dropper posts, you know which ones are really good and which ones aren't. If you know of a specific one that doesn't creak at all, I don't like a bunch of racket going on. That's kind of the clue that something's wrong with your bike, right? Is you start hearing the noise and you stop and check it out. So I don't want anything that makes racket. So if you know, leave me a comment below. So what's all this bike business about anyways? Well, me and my wife have both been lifelong cyclists, and we love to ride our bikes, and so having the bikes in the van all the time just leads to more of this. Thanks for watching.